So to get things cleared up right away, I liked Dawntrail, the launch content storyline. I thought it was fun. I don't like raking things like expansions because it's weird, but for the sake of appeasing anyone coming in looking to pick a fight, I say it's better than Heaven's Word, but not as good as Stormblood. Wait, I've made it word. Look, this isn't a video to trash Dawntrail or Heaven's Word or any of the expansions. Even my least favorite is still pretty good, but as my summer comes to a close and I'm macrodosing Twitter against my better judgment, I've kind of noticed that people online are bad at talking about critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV. By the end of this video, I may be among them, who knows, but I find a lot of conversations around this expansion sort of baffling. I've mostly seen three major talking points. People upset about or defending whimsy, people upset about or defending the difficulty of the normal content, and Wooklamat discourse. Hey, gamers, did you know that there's a culture war going on, and in the year of our Lord, 2024, Final Fantasy XIV, long-standing bastion of conservative values, has suddenly, out of nowhere, decided to go woke? Wow, huge, if true in any way. That's all I'm gonna say about Mark Kern's desperate attempts to be culturally relevant in this video. Sorry, Mark. Maybe focus on finishing your game or, paying child support or whatever else is going on in your life. No, the big issue here is that Dawntrail kind of failed to live up to its own potential in a couple of really critical ways, and I want to talk about them, but it's this poison, this discourse rot that I feel obliged to clear the air about and declare that no one seems to know how to critique this game properly, perhaps culminating in a suitably unhinged video from one pro Jared. God, I'm bringing in all the heavy hitters here. And his unhinged video where he says the story would be better if Wooklamat fell in love with you. Sorry, Jared. I know your life kind of sucks right now, but this video is garbage. So, no, I don't think I can sit around and keep peace with my brain on this one. I have very specific issues with Dawntrail, and they are issues that are themselves interesting to ruminate on, and at least a good deal more interesting than having Blorbo warfare on Twitter because Bakul Jaja is hot but did bad things, or Sphene wants to commit genocide but is sorry about it, or Wooklamat has a transgender voice actor. Oh no, the West has fallen. Okay, so first and foremost, chief among the things I like is the new character, the central focus of the main story. Wooklamat, I like her. She's a fun, good addition to the story. People don't like her for many reasons, but I think they're being too serious about this game, which it's a funny thing to say considering what I'm going to be doing later, but hear me out. Wooklamat is not the problem. It's actually been kind of tricky to track down a thorough breakdown of the complaints about her, but they mostly gravitate around her being kind of a shonen protagonist. She's a lovable idiot. She seems unqualified to inherit the throne of Tuliyollal outside of her love for peace and harmony. She loves her homeland, but hasn't really learned to appreciate it all, so the first half of the game hinges on that. She recruits you, Alphino, Alize, Kryl, and Erenville to help her win the trials, and that includes, exploring Yoptural, learning about the people, their cultures and values, and part of this journey includes her recognizing that she has to grow and develop into a more proper ruler. There's even the scene here with her father, Gulul Jaja.
Lama T thinks she understands our many peoples, their histories, their cultures, their beliefs. But she knows only what she's seen in the capital. And it's not only her who concerns me. Even this early in the contest, you must have realized. As potential rulers, all four claimants are lacking.
This is the tone of the first half of Dawntrail, and I have some small complaints, sure, but I have to temper them because I'm exceedingly mentally unwell at the moment, and it's very likely that it just reads way more saccharine than I usually care for. Wooklamat, compared to other central characters from Tural, lives kind of a charmed life, one full of love and support, and seeing something as nuanced as Succession get bandied about entirely couched in the language of harmony and whimsical contests and a slightly melancholy but ultimately rich and fulfilling history that mostly centers how good and wise and compassionate Gulul Jaja is, is something that I find a bit too cloying. I mean, God, even the Scions that are out here just sort of waxing lyrical about how good friendship and compassion and cultural appreciation is, talking about disparate cultures coming together over a nice meal, as though their tour of Garlemald one expansion ago didn't sink into that kind of deeper, complex nightmare of war and imperialism. But, like, fine, I get it. I'm being a downer. This isn't the brooding, sad hour. It's a story that's indulgent and whimsical and fantastical, and we're here to enjoy sinking our teeth into a vibrant new world. The vibes here gotta remain fresh, and they do. You know, from camp asshole Bakul Jaja revealing a wildly grotesque, tragic backstory to the seeding of Zeralja as the true villain that doesn't really start to come into fruition until right at the end. You know, the first half of Dawntrail is breezy and fun. Valley Garmanda is reawoken, but, you know, we kill it. GG easy. We win the contest. Kona is a good boy. Thancred and Urianger have sex a bunch, and it culminates in my favorite dungeon of the expansion, the Sky Deep Cenote. We find the gate to the City of Gold, but Gulul Jaja will talk to us about it later. It's all fun, and critically, Wuk-Lamat functions as a solid centerpiece for it all, despite the kind of complaints about how you're not the main character and it's her story instead, and you're not personally the most important person in the narrative. That's all whatever. It's actually cool and good that they did this, and a lot of this is because the Warrior of Light, our player character, is a very tricky figure to center in a narrative. Most silent protagonists are, and that's kind of why Shadowbringers and Endwalker had to basically imply your narrative through its supporting cast. This is, in a way, an exercise in exploring that kind of implied storytelling through framing you in contrast to Wuk-Lamat. It's why a lot of people picked up on the vibe that you function as a mentor figure to her. If there is the weakest part of the game, from like just a pacing situation, it would be entering into Shaktural for the first time with Erenville. It's like a Western intermission, and it feels a little out of place, but like, whatever, it's fine. It's hard to appreciate because it happens after the reveal that Zeralja is sneaking into the City of Gold to become the main villain, and outside of getting involved in a minor plot cul-de-sac to play High Noon, you know, meet Estinian just kind of out here, learn about Eleneshpia's real name. You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, please. And it will. But this is all to say that none of this is really the problem. There are some small grievances, some small part of the story that feel a little toothless. It's just kind of wrapped up in being lighthearted, and that is ultimately what I wanted out of this expansion. You know, prior to this, we've been kind of on a rough go of things. The storyline that ranged from ARR to Endwalker is a little hard to work out, and there is a lot of complex issues surrounding it. The writing, particularly for ARR and Heavensward, tended towards the gritty and dark, a story inspired by Game of Thrones, as some interviews have cited. And it shows, you know, particularly as ARR's final plot beat is a Red Wedding level event. Seemingly at the end of it, the Queen of Ul'dah is poisoned, Roban gets his arm lopped off and sent to prison as your special task force of soldiers all defect and take over, ousting you and your Scion friends in an event that seemingly kills everyone of the central cast but Alphinaud and Tataru, leaving you three to sneak away into Ishgard to escape being hunted down and killed. This all sets up a really particular relationship with the player. This game is not afraid to kill characters, even really important ones. Now, it's kind of a fake trick, but it sets up a weird emotional connection. Like, every death at the end of ARR was fake. Even Nanamo was fake poisoned. The entirety of ARR actually only killed one major Scion, Moonbrita, who was like, I don't know, she was like here for 2 patches or so, but, you know, she counts. Heavensward didn't really fare better. Like, yes, they killed fan favorite Sorshafon and Nacelle, but the only Scion to get axed was Papalimo at the very end, leading into Stormblood. And, okay, yeah, like, technically Minfilia, ever since the end of ARR, like, gave up her physical form to bond with the Mother Crystal or whatever, but technically her death was in Shadowbringers. Again, the only Scion to die in that expansion. You know, Stormblood actually killed 0 Scions, too. So this conception of these X-Packs as more brutal and invested in killing off long-standing characters is kind of an exaggeration. This hasn't meant that these storylines were all bloodless, of course. You know, Stormblood kills off major antagonist Yotsuyu in a way that I found gut-wrenching and really effective. You know, Stormblood, actually good game, I'm sorry. Shadowbringers kills off other fan favorite Emmett Selk in one of the best moments of Final Fantasy XIV to date. Endwalker, while not invested in killing too many named characters, though they still killed Dahewan, had a lot of nightmares going on. You know, a baby almost drowned in it, a guy shoots himself almost entirely on screen, the final zone seems to pay a blood tithe with every remaining scion and a grotesque monument to the escape sequence from ARR's Red Wedding. And, you know, that tradition remains alive in Dawntrail, with introducing Ghoul Jaja and Namika and killing them both, and Kafkiwa, and, you know, they even kind of try to work out Zoralja and Sphene as complex and interesting enough villains that their deaths are at least, you know, a little melancholy, but okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's really easy to get lost down a rabbit hole of discourse because this game has existed for like a decade or so, and with it come myriad expectations. Like, I just now obsessed over proving a very small point and over-exaggeration because this game has been percolating in my brain ever since I started playing it in patch 4.2 Stormblood Best Blood baby, let's go. I need to confirm. As we approach the actual parts of the games I start to struggle with, that even in here, Wuk-Lamat remains consistently solid up until very specific critical points, and those are issues I have with the game's structure and curiosity with its own ideas. It has nothing to do with ridiculous arguments about her voice acting, or whether or not furries are perverts, or whether or not she's in love with you personally. Grow up, Jared, this is embarrassing. Okay, let's talk about the big change. So, while you're out playing cowboys, a giant electricity dome lands in the middle of Shaktural, right on top of Erenville's home Yasulani. Oh no, his hot mom lives there. While you all try and figure out what the fuck is going on there, the conflict comes to a predictable head. Zoralja's raised an army, invades Tuliolal, kills his dad, and we gotta go kill him. Fine, I'm not gonna interrogate foreign policy on that one. We call in the cavalry, the Scions reunite, and we plan a means to fight back. This is not groundbreaking as far as structuring a narrative goes, but, you know, it's a good elevation of the stakes and the ideas at play, fine. But when you break in through their little fort, enter into Heritage Found, and run into Turali people with the futuristic tech from the invading Alexandria, we stumble onto the most fascinating and, like, deeply unsettling element this expansion brings to the table. Honestly, kind of the centerpiece of the game for me. This land, stolen by the Dome, was fused with Alexandria when it was summoned, and through some kind of warping of realities and universes and whatnot, has spent 30 years in that state, as land that is both Shaktural and Alexandria. In what seems like a matter of days to our intrepid heroes, a massive swath of Wuk-Lamat's homeland has been colonized and taken over, the people integrated and nationalized, and among them, her nursemaid, Namika, already an elderly woman at the beginning of the game, is now here, 30 years older, on her last breath. In an instant, Wuk-Lamat has to reckon with the effects of an entire nation superimposing itself on top of her land and the people she knew warped beyond recognition through the simple passage of time. It was honestly one of the most gut-wrenching moments of the expansion as she tries to come to terms with it all. As this happens, we're introduced to the Queen of Alexandria, Sphene, and the game takes a lot of pains to show her affection and love for her people. We learn about how their technology works, built upon this miracle metal electrope, all with the grim implication that Erenville's mother is out here, and that something has happened to her. And then when Namika dies, everyone in town forgets entirely about her, a function of the regulators they all wear that use souls to revive them should they suffer a sudden fatal injury. They use the souls of the departed that aren't revived, purge them of their identity, their memories, their selves, upload those memories to the cloud, and then repurpose their blank souls as life insurance people can buy and stockpile in their own regulators. This is all important stuff, both because it explains how Zoralja came back to life in the middle of his fight with his dad, and also because the game really wants you to consider the ethics of what is happening. This is some of the best and most interesting parts of the expansion for me. I think that the decision to build up a lighthearted treatise on how to lead a country through peace and love and appreciation for culture, only to force our new vow of resolve to stress test this principle as her people are stolen and integrated into a foreign culture, one built on a grotesque and unethical system, and on top of it all, the people that they took from her are dying, not to warfare or violence, but from highly unorthodox natural causes. Now, I think some of you may be trying to guess where I'm going with this, and yes, kind of at the heart of some of my criticisms is the big girl herself, but I don't want to come off as just a boundless hater. I think Sphene is a really interesting figure. Her idea, the vision of a ruler who loves her people but has faced an apocalypse so devastating, an extinction-level event, that she is compelled to take drastic, nightmarish action in order to save them, warped to the point that she makes an agreement with a bloodthirsty tyrant to take over the source and harvest their souls to power her immortal afterlife. All of that is conceptually fantastic. There is a chilling parallel drawn between the Yokui's theology of the dead living in our memories and her obsessive perversion of that ideal in the final zone of the game, Living Memory, where all of the memories of her people are preserved and recreated in an eternal digital paradise, which she believes is truly preserving them, giving her people not just survival from the end of times, but immortality. Hey, as a fun little Easter egg, this is all thematic echoing of the song Melodies of Life from Final Fantasy IX. None of the problems with Dawntrail are around the characters, the ideas, the ambition of it. In a lot of ways, the basic building blocks that brought us such big hitters like Shadowbringers are all still here, alive and well. In fact, I think the most cohesive and well-written character arc in this expansion goes to our dour antagonist, Zoraljah. Now, yes, a lot of memes have been spun about how bad of an idea his invasion is, but I think that's actually kind of a thematically potent thing to burden him with. See, while not a blessed sibling like his father Galul Jaja or the queer community's daddy Bakul Jaja, he is a miracle in his own right. Blessed siblings can't have children of their own, but here he is, true-born son of his father, you know, the resilient son. He has an insane legacy, a cultural oddity, and he has proven himself physically competent, stronger than he has any right to be. But the right had revealed him to be, just like the other candidates, insufficient. He excelled at some things, sure, but didn't in other places like everyone else. But he couldn't accept that and learn from his shortcomings, and instead grew obsessed with proving himself in the one field he knew he excelled: strength and combat. So when he fails to fight the shade of his father in the last rite, it poisons his mind, triply so as Wook Lamont, the weakest candidate at the start of the story, pulls through with her allies. He kills his father, but feels empty and challenges Wook Lamont to rally her forces and try and stop him. Every move he makes isn't the move of a leader, but a fixation, a crushing desire to make the miracle of his life meaningful, to actualize his vaunted reputation. And this obsession destroys him. Of course he doesn't know what's needed to conquer Atheris. He's probably never thought about any other country. He called Garlemald cowardly and weak, and far be it for me to gas up the bad guys here, but like, they did get closer than he's ever been to accomplishing his vision. He couldn't even overthrow He couldn't even overthrow Alexandria, instead entering into an agreement with the Queen. It's why he seems so lost in his trial fight. What has he been fighting for? What is the point of his life? It's the moment that all the treacly sentimentality about love and compassion and family has been building to, and it's perfect. He was so lost that he couldn't even recognize that he has a son that wanted a father, a family, and that family is kind of a miracle in itself. It's excellent, a genuine highlight of all the expansions, 10 out of 10. But it doesn't end there. He's not the true villain of Dawntrail. See, the big final confrontation is with our most spherical queen, and as much as I don't want to be this antagonistic, we need to talk about Sphene. Let's pull at a small thread here, the one that started this whole video essay, and easily the thing I kind of hate to be hung up on. It isn't really important as a big part of the greater vision of the story as a whole, sure, but okay, so like, just to lay out these facts about her again. She would do anything for her people. She allies with you to take down Zoraljah once he executes Code Blood and starts wiping out her people and harvesting their souls. The entire agreement in the first place was built on harvesting fresh souls to keep her people alive in perpetuity, including maintaining living memory, the constantly running digital paradise that keeps her people's recorded memories alive. To this end, she goes ahead with the plan even without Zeralja, because her desire to save her people is paramount. This is because she too is an Endless, a recorded memory of the original Sphene who died centuries ago, and what's left of her in this memory has been essentially operating on these principles above all. Okay, cool. I understand all of this. I get why she needs to be stopped. Got it. Good. What the fuck happens in living memory, though? Like, okay, I get the heartfelt, bittersweet reunions with the departed in it, sure, that's all fine. Amika's memory is in there, we see Otis again, Kryle meets her parents, and yes, you know, Ellen Eshbia finds his mom, Kafkiwa, also an Endless. I get the sentimentality in the final area, the twisted melancholy of having to say goodbye to your loved ones, that's fine. But my issue, I'm embarrassed to say, is logistic. This is a populace that Sphene recognizes as just as alive as the living citizens of Alexandria, and her plan to fuse her world onto the Source and take it over involves her erasing her memories to become a more efficient machine to preserve her people. She sacrifices everything she has for them. But we get to living memory, meet with her, tell her our plan to stop her, she starts the fusion process, and then there's nothing. No troops, no resistance. All her people are just stored on 4 big terminals that can be shut down with a little bit of living ether. You take a big tour through her paradise world and wipe her people out by her eyes with absolutely no resistance. Like, hell, most of the Scions stay behind, leaving you with a trim party of Wooklamont, Kryle, Grahatia, and Aaronville to save the world, just in case someone tries to interfere and stop us, and nothing happens. Nothing tries to stop you. It drags living memory, this beautifully sad digital mausoleum, into an exhausting bit of pedantry, and I don't want that. I don't want to be sitting here with these kinds of beautifully sentimental goodbyes, all while just completely flummoxed by how we're just completely getting away with this. You know, maybe I missed some lore somewhere, maybe we're just supposed to assume that Sphene is too busy starting up fusion to pay attention to everything she's turning herself into a tyrant for, going up in smoke, and if so, I don't know, fine. I apologize that I wasn't thorough enough, but again, the internet is wrapped up mostly in 2 talking points about this area, a supremely uninteresting effort to figure out why we can't restore the false paradise back to its pretty state, sorry folks, it's part of the story, and a mildly interesting conversation on the ethics of doing so, and look, I know it's not important. I know it's not important so much because I keep getting in fights with a friend of mine over this pedantic obsession with logic and mechanics of the final boss of Endwalker, and I find that discussion banal and frustrating because it doesn't matter. So why do I care about something like this here and now? Well, okay. So some minor reasons may make sense, right? Endwalker's final conflict with Medion makes a lot of compromises and presents something that's a little abstract and hard to dig your teeth into, but it does so explicitly because the framing of the story is centered on a radical, active choice to believe in a hopeful future in light of a crushingly certain oblivion. The end of days is upon us, and it is using despair to warp people into monsters and destroying the fabric of our reality. Hell, we even go to Medion's lair in Ultima Thule to see a sample platter of the existential, totalizing despair of the cosmos she witnessed. And in all of that, all of these answers our Scions give in response have all lingered in my mind as personally unsatisfying, because they feel weirdly indirect to the crushing issues presented. The capstone of all of this for me is the Ia discussing the inevitable heat death of the universe, to Yashol's simple response of, I'm not going to give up just because someone told me it's impossible. Because that is the point. Hope, belief in a good future, a better tomorrow, isn't something that can be chemically solved for in most cases. We are, all of us, going to die. Cruelty will exist forever. Our sun will go out. Entropy is going to happen. On a grand enough scale, our lives are wildly inconsequential sparks, gone in an instant, and in the resisting of that kind of entropic despair that brings us together, it can't be a logic puzzle that you cleverly outsmart. Meaning is what we give to ourselves. That is the critical failing of Hermes' mission, the reason why he doomed us to oblivion, because he wanted to approach the cosmos as though the ancients were at the center of it, and that the meaning of life is an equation or a chemical phenomenon, and not something abstract that we have to define for ourselves. In contrast, Dawntrail is similarly uninterested in making its final thematic conversational logic puzzle. I do get that, but it's framed on a very clear motivation from one character who laments her own weakness to the point that she's willing to destroy herself for her people. The mechanical framing of the two events feel wrong to me. Each vertical slice of misery served up by Medion is a trial, something she's giving you to sink you into despair, taking away companions over and over to break your will. The overcoming of these trials feels in direct line with the ideas of the story. It works together. In comparison, Sphene completely is just hands off in living memory. So now you're going from locale to locale to have character beats, and they're good beats, I can't overstate that, but it feels mechanical, and it feels mechanical in a really particular way. I feel like no look at an expansion of Final Fantasy XIV is complete these days without comparing it to the Golden Goose. Dear old Shadowbringers. I am obviously not a Shadowbringers hater, you can quote me on that. I think that Shadowbringers was innovative and bold and exciting from a story perspective. Up until then, the Warrior of Light has played a pretty ambiguous part of the narrative. You're the muscle. Sure, you're important. Sure, you have a connection to Hydaelyn and you have the Echo. A lot of the more dramatic, intense plot beats hit your companions more than you. It's fine. It's a solid way to structure a narrative in an MMO for sure. But Shadowbringers invests you in your character's mechanics cleverly to draw out a deeply compelling story. You're both so important that your friend from the first ever Alliance raid crosses time and space to drag you to a different shard, an inversion to the Source's issue, where the Source is constantly encroached upon by the World of Darkness. The first succeeded. Their Warriors of Light did everything right, saved the world from darkness so much that light instead burst forth and is on the precipice of obliterating it entirely. So you're brought in to become the world's Warrior of Darkness. It's taken that sparse world-building elements from Final Fantasy III and spinning them in a way that works out incredibly well. You destroy the Sin Eaters, eat the light from the Light Wardens, you're guided and helped by Emmett Selk, the villain of the story at this point, in hopes that you're so special that you can transcend mortal limits. And at the end of it all, you fall short. The light you've consumed threatens to overwhelm you, destroy you. They've made your special self-insert the very thing that's going to end the world because you aren't strong enough to save everything. It's great. The game also does a lot of interesting mechanical tweaks to the game too, instead of the past few expansions constantly sidestepping your Scion companions as relevant combat figures, short of the, occasional solo duty. They made the trust system, where you can engage in new content with your NPC friends, involving them more actively in the action of the game. The second trial is at 79 instead of 77. The final boss is something that temporarily overwhelms you, but timely intervention from your friends helps turn the tides, and together, you save the first. Fantastic. Now, Endwalker follows the mechanical footsteps of this almost to a T, and that's actually okay, because Shadowbringers and Endwalker were written as two halves of a story that culminates in the grand finale of the plot they had been building since the beginning. Endwalker had a tall order, and in setting up a clear perspective, a clean guideline of how the game is going to be structured, it feels like a coherent parallel to Shadowbringers, down to your character's canon class shifting from Dark Knight to Paladin. Now the light at the height of the encroaching darkness. It too has a fake-out finale. Instead of a Sin Eater, though, it's beating Zodiark, and kind of early too, damn. And now you have to stop the apocalypse. And at the final end of all things, Medion goes in hard to obliterate you, but you're saved at the end by your friends in a grand parallel to the ending of 1.0, with all of them praying to protect you. It's really poignant and sweet and good, actually. And the issue is that Dawntrail is, on a structural level, kind of just following in those same footsteps, despite being a brand new adventure. It isn't really noticeable or important for a while, though, is the thing. Like, the first half is still fun and vibrant and pleasant, and the big reveal at Heritage Found is still compelling and good. The Zeralja is still well-written and interesting and meaningful, but it really isn't until the last zone that the curtains pulled back too much. It starts with a mild thing, like, we reunited the Scions only to just have most of them not really do anything. You know, Stola, Thancred, Urianger, and Estinian help in one trial each, and all of them just hold the line on the other side of the portal against nothing. You go into living memory, and we have to have big emotional scenes, and having a sense of conflict, of like direct resistance, would muddy the sentiment of being able to reunite with those we've lost to say a final farewell, so it just doesn't happen. There's already memes out there about how the final dungeon, Alexandria, is now the fourth dungeon that's a recreation of the end of a world. And when you finally dig deep into the Meso Terminal, find the Eternal Queen, because it's the endgame trial and they don't want to make it a duty support, she just sweeps Skraha and Wuklamon and Kryl aside. But also, you need to be fought specifically because this is where the issues feel at their most obvious to me. The ideas are fine, the theming is good enough, but it feels so arbitrarily formalistic now. It just has to go through the motions because, you know, Shadowbringers and Endwalker did it, and it feels stale now. You know, this is supposed to be a new story, boundless possibilities, a new world is out here, and it wouldn't be that bad if it didn't have these massive, impressive ideas that it has on the plate. Like, let's talk about Kakiwa. She's been kind of an inspiration for Erenville to learn what he can about the world and whatnot, and she's been kind of briefly mentioned here and there, only for Heritage Found to happen on top of her. Boom. 30 years. Throughout the events of the second half of Dawntrail, there is a building, looming, obvious problem here. We know this. Erenville knows this. Kakiwa isn't telling him this, but we know, right? We've known since the first guy from Yasulani said, "I've never heard of Kakiwa." And it's kind of great. Like, there's something beautifully tragic in it, just sitting with the suspense of it all, and the culmination of it kind of misses the obvious mark. Saying goodbye to a loved one is never easy. I know that. And the things she tells him, the way she wants to end her afterlife, it's all suitably poignant and nice, but in the effort to make these big, bold statements on how we let go of people, they left on the table the more gripping element. Erenville lost her in a matter of days. No one on the other side of the dome had contact with the rest of Tuliholal for 30 years. Kakiwa lost her son, her homeland, all of it, and by her perspective, they never came back for her until after she died. This is all layered on top of the horrific soul regulator system that was integrated into the part of Shaktaral they took, and yes, sure, not everyone used them, but the game puts so much weight on the ethics of repurposing souls like that, only to brush it completely aside. We have still not had the conversation about what to do with the regulators, because it's now about, ultimately, the duty a ruler has to their people. And not to get all radical on you guys in the middle of video game discourse, but like, that's the least interesting idea on the table. Okay, Wuklamot, Kona, Bakuljaja, Zeralja, and Sphene are all inheritors of some perspective of how to rule a country. Wuklamot believes in peace and understanding, in different cultures coming together in harmony. She is the culmination of all the hopes and ideals of her people as she charges into Alexandria to stop this war. And Sphene is her twisted shadow, too in love with her people, too obsessed with keeping them alive forever. But like, it's not grappling with the more substantive, interesting element. Like, it imposes a bizarre colonialism element, a people utterly displaced from their old culture, and it was one that Sphene took in as her own. It runs counter to her intent, that she took them in instead of harvested them for her living memory, and the implication there is genuinely compelling. It demonstrates an internal contradiction to the character, some memory of the woman who cannot bear the brutality that the programming has determined. Look, to really highlight this, both Midian and Sphene are essentially computer problems, right? Midian observed the cosmos and found that every other society begged for oblivion and death, that the only thing awaiting the people she cared for was endless suffering and despair. So she made the rational decision that ending it all now would save them the pain in the long run. That's basically a Star Trek episode. The only reason it works for me is that Midian doesn't recognize herself as alive in that way, so like, No, you can't just tell her to start the process of ending suffering by killing herself. Hi, YouTube. Sphne's reasoning is that her endless system requires more ether and souls than she has anymore, so she has to harvest them from external sources. It drives a sharp dividing line between her people and the others, something that in the cold logical processing is the only way it works, but the snag in there is what remains of her heart. And the game does highlight it, but briefly, and instead of it being her choice, her humanity, she just begs to be put down instead. It's okay. I'm just way more burned out on what I see as wasted potential. Too many really compelling ideas left on the table in favor of a story of what? Like learning how to be a good ruler to your people? It just comes off as kind of unsatisfying, too easy. Wooklamont goes through trials and loss and pain, but with each struggle she's rewarded with a swelling of meaning and support and love. Her father dies, but he gives her his parting words, and the people of Tudal mourn for him and rally behind her. Zoralja invades, but kills like 50 people, and then can't gain any further ground. We go to kill him, but he leaves behind his son, Gululja, who Wooklamont and Kona both adopt, essentially, and also he inherits his father's throne in Alexandria. Sphene is put down, and her people are left in her hands. Hell, the soldiers Zoralja uses against us aren't even people, they're just automatons. There's very little bite at the end of the story, and the effect feels like it's constantly trying to drag us back into better, brighter, happier times. Loss, but it's beautiful. Tragedy, but it's profound. Monarchy, but it's joyous and vibrant and happy. There's one last lingering thread in this before I wrap up. Dawntrail's vision of family is very weird. Gululjaja gives to his children his throne, and the game frames Wooklamont and Kona as inheritors of his legacy. Lamati, the head of resolve, Kona, the head of reason. Kryl meets her parents in the afterlife and instantly vows to carry on their mission to stop living memory. Erenville is portrayed as following in his mother's footsteps. Gululjaja has no life beyond the burdens his birth has put on him. The only thing Zoralja leaves his precious little baby boy is his legacy, his kingdom. It's the kind of thing that's fine in a vacuum, but it creates this strange obsession with portraying family as a lineage of a vision, that we are all links on a chain heading in one direction. In the game's effort to focus on particular elements of the story and trying to compose itself this much, what's left on the table feels deeply incurious about something as rich and complex as the relationship between parents and their children, or as complicated as negotiating colonization of your people as a ruler. It rests instead in a really comfortable place, just about the ideas of ruling from compassion and understanding and mutual respect, and ultimately, that's okay. See, one of the gravest sins of the internet is that it's really easy to turn everything into some grand, significant part of culture. Games are either masterpieces or train wrecks. No one can just not like a character. There has to be a manufactured outrage around them, some kind of proof that they are immoral characters that people shouldn't like. And I want to be clear here. I've spent a long time complaining and meowing about Dawntrail here, but it is, ultimately, fine. At its heart, FF14 is still exceptionally good at writing heartfelt character moments. The combat is still exciting. They gave my main a new damage button, so I'm obligated to say that the new changes are objectively good. Those are the rules. The ultimate benefit of FF14 and how it works is that it is, at least until they make an announcement otherwise, a constant work in progress. The potential for FF14 to embark on newer, bolder things will continue to exist going forward, and that is one of the more charming things about this game. Look, I started my tenure with MMOs with World of Warcraft. Actually, that's not true. I'm a Ragnarok Online cat. God, do you all remember that? The point is that FF14's commitment and dedication to its story, and specifically making you go through the story instead of it being optional lore for you to peruse, places it in a precarious tension between its desire to tell a story and its obligation to be a game that is built around the player's agency. It's why in Shadowbringers, when you're sin-eatering, they have to contrive a way to suppress its effects for now, so you can, run roulettes or whatever if you wanted. this tension does ultimately compromise a lot of FF14's narrative. A lot of things have to kind of exist in a diegetic no man's land, so the work they do to put into a story has to consider that ultimately it is asking you to make compromises with it. I mean, I don't know, look, there are millions of players that are all also the singular hero of the world, like, come on guys. But that's also part of the game's beauty. It cannot take itself quite so intimately seriously, so every expansion is in itself an act of navigating around its own rules to tell something compelling. And I think even in something as flawed as Dawntrail, a lot of that heart still remains unchanged. Take this video ultimately as notes for going forward. There are a lot of things to really love about Dawntrail, and it really only strains itself the longer it tries to echo its predecessors. Shadowbringers and Endwalker are wonderful and complement each other really well, but as we're told at the end of it all, it's our duty as a fragment of the Great Explorer to branch out, to find new things, to explore. And I think it would be great to see more of that boldness, more of that adventurous spirit in the game's writing and structure. Also, I think the next expansion should be FF6 theme, and Reen should get a new class upgrade. We're out of Scions. We need a new one to have, like, a new class. Wait, where are you going? Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Athena Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Renix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Foxy Hex, Gail Simmons, Grizz, Lewis Wells, Low-Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lappin, Nurai the Redmarked, Noun Verbly, Professor Bopper, Saint Rawberry, Thomas Wolpez, Trade Good, Valerian Wraithwall, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.